Alright, so today I'm going to be showing you my settings, my keybinds in the F-14 Tomcat. First thing we're going to do is look at the axis. I always like to set this up first. So I've got the WinWing HOTAS, the F-16 joystick, and the F-18 throttle. So we're just going to double check our pitch and our roll and make sure there's nothing else on those keybinds. And as far as tuning the axis, I just use a straight line. We're going to double check our throttle. We're going to use the left one and the right one independently. Check our rudder and our toe brakes. And I do have a slight curve on my toe brakes because the WinWing rudder pedals are a little bit stiff when they get to the end. I like to tune the axis, so I push it over as far as it's comfortable, and then I use the saturation to pull it back. And the same for the toe pedals. They're a little bit stiff. Let's make them even 75. So I've got this toe brake set wrong. Let's see here. I always like to flip the show HUD camera down, and I've looked for a key binding, and there is no key binding for that, so you always have to do that with your mouse. We like to do air starts, and I mainly just do BFM guns only, so I'm just going to show you my basic setup and what I like to key bind. Starting off, we're going to do the master arm. In the game, you're going to have to do the master arm cover first. So on my throttle, I've got a flaps switch that I never use. So I use that for the cover, and I just have it on the up position for cover open and the down position for the cover closed. Next, we have the master arm switch, which is right below it. In the game, this is actually a three-way switch, and I almost forgot about that. I've got down for master arm training, in the middle for off, and then all the way up for arm. So if we look at the game, you can see how that looks. Next, on my nose wheel steering, if I press the nose wheel steering in, you can actually see where that button is. It's going to be under autopilot reference, nose wheel steering toggle. Just type in nose wheel steering if you can't find it. So it's in a slightly different spot on my joystick than it is in the F-14 joystick. This is a 5-way hat switch, and I'll show you the other buttons I've added to this hat switch, which are not realistic to the aircraft, but I like to use them for my air start. So if I press the nose wheel steering button up, it's VDI mode toggle, and if I press it down, HSD mode toggle. And what that does in the game is it toggles the top TV and the bottom TV. And you can see the switches here. And those are on my nose wheel steering button. Forward on the hat switch, it changes the gun rate. And you can just press it with your mouse. If you want to keybind it, it's simply gun rate toggle. And again, these switches are on my nose wheel steering button. I've got a 5-way hat, so I can go up, down, back, forward, and depress. And the depress is actually my actual nose wheel steering button. HUD filter. If you pull it out, it's going to switch the HUD to red, and this is good for nighttime. It's simply going to be under HUD filter toggle. I'm going to put this one on my nose wheel steering hat switch. So if I press it toward me, I can now toggle the different filters for the HUD. That's going to look like this. Comes in handy when the lighting is changing from daytime to evening or from nighttime to morning. So let's get rid of the pilot. I should have done that first. Let's hit right shift and P. And if you want to get rid of the joystick, you can hit delete key. We're going to leave it in for this video. Next thing I like to do when I'm setting up my aircraft for dogfight, and that is to open the asymmetric limiter off and on. So you first have to raise the cover and then lift the switch. And what that allows you to do is when you're splitting the throttle, it'll actually let the engines switch. Let's see if I've shut it down. If that switch is not on and I just pull one of these back, both of these are going to be off. Like I'm not going to be in afterburn. So let's just say I move the left engine into afterburn. See how it's not actually splitting the throttle? So if you want to split the throttle, the switch has to be moved forward. Asymmetric thrust limiter cover, and then the second one, asymmetric thrust limiter off. On my throttle, I like to just push this knob in for the cover, and then I push this knob in for the switch. The next switch you might want to keep on is this cover. In the control, it's going to be called the emergency wing sweep handle cover toggle. On my throttle, it's going to be this switch right here. So when I'm setting up, it's a really quick boom, boom, boom. So all these three buttons are kind of together. Next we have the wing sweep lever. Now you can do this with your mouse. You could right click it, pull it out, and then move it forward. It's going to be kind of difficult to do that in a dogfight. So in the controls, we're going to now switch to axis. It's going to be emergency wing sweep. The wing sweep is going to be on my slider. So if I'm pressing this all the way forward, my wings are going to go forward. And this, you're going to see the slider, it moves all the way to the left. When I want the wings back, I'll pull the slider back. Wings are going to be back. The slider is going to be all the way to the right. One of my favorite things about the WinWing throttle is these sliders. So the slider is right here. All the way down is wings back. All the way forward is wings forward. And it's got a nice little click right in the middle so you can tell when it's centered. While we're here, I use this slider for the HUD brightness. Now you don't have to keybind this one, but I'm one of those picky people. So you can see as I pull it all the way back, HUD goes off, and as I move it forward, the HUD goes brighter. In the controls, that's going to be just HUD brightness under axis commands. So we should talk about the radar modes. I've got a 5-way hat switch. If I press it down, it's going to be VSL low. That's going to look like this on the HUD. And see the pattern that it's using? On my WinWing joystick, I'm going to use this left hat switch. So VSL low is going to be down. Next we'll do VSL high. So VSL high is going to be a radar sweep basically above the HUD, above the nose. That's the one I like to use if I'm in a rate fight or a loop fight. It's going to be up on my hat switch. Next we have PAL, target designate forward, but I'm actually going to use it to the side. The radar sweep looks like this. And this is a very good one at the beginning of a merge. And if I'm not mistaken, I think this one goes farther than the others. Here's one thing to consider. If you switch into gun, then you're not going to be able to see your radar sweep. So a lot of times I'll come out of gun or out of weapons altogether and wait for my radar to get a lock. And then I'll switch into guns or missiles. Actually, in missiles, you can still see the sweep. So those are the main three that I use, but there's also PLM button, which I don't really like this one. It's supposed to be on the throttle, but I actually use it on my hat switch to the left. On the HUD, I don't think you can actually see it, but basically I believe it's kind of like a bore sight around this crosshair. I could be wrong. Just correct me if I'm wrong. So once again, I like to use all my radar modes on this left hat switch. And on the Viper, it's called a TMS switch. Once again, down, VSL low, up, VSL high, to the right, PAL, and to the left, PLM. So let's look at the F-14 joystick. All the way down is the off position, and then we have guns, sidewinders, and then Sparrows or Phoenix. Weapon selector down, and simply weapon selector up. On my joystick, I like to use the right 5-way hat switch. So simply down and up to cycle through weapons. Next we've got the countermeasures. If you look at the joystick, it's simply countermeasure dispense. On my joystick, I like to use this button right on the side. It's a 5-way hat switch, but I just press it in. Also on the joystick, we've got a trim switch and this red button. You can actually see them moving. Actually, you can't see the trim moving. Thought you could, but that red button is simply the store release button. On my joystick, it's going to be this big red button, and then the trim switch is right here on the top as well. Trim is simply called trim. Air brakes we forgot. So let's see how fast we are when the air brakes are allowed to come out. Air brakes are coming out, it looks like at 400 knots. I actually thought you had to be slower than that for them to come out. Air brakes are going to be speed brake extend and forward for retract. On my throttle, the speed brakes are going to be this 3-way switch right here. While we're here, we also have the cage seam button, which is called simply cage seam button. So if you lose your radar, you can actually press the cage seam button and lock your gun sight into place and aim World War II style. One of the things I like for all of my aircraft is to zoom in slow. WinWing has 2 extra hat switches, and this is the switch I like to use for my zooms. It's the bottom left hat switch. So I like to go left to zoom out and right to zoom in. In the controls is simply zoom out slow and zoom in slow. Now under VR, if you go to the UI layer, I like to use the down to toggle VR zoom. And then you also have spyglass if I press up, but that is super zoomed and I never use it. Okay, next let's talk about gesture. To bring up gesture's menu, simply press toggle menu. On my joystick, I use the extra hat switch. I press down to bring up Jester's menu. Now if you want to make Jester quieter, if you look over here, see this volume knob? This will make Jester louder or quieter. ICS volume decrease, ICS volume increase. On my throttle, it's this knob right in between the two sliders, so it makes it easy to find. Another handy one for especially if you're recording ALR 67 volume. So this is going to be like your RWR warning. Like if someone's locking you, it's going to go bee-boo, bee-boo, bee-boo. ALR 67. On my throttle, it's going to be this knob right here. Alright, so miscellaneous switches that I like to use when I'm dogfighting. If you look at this switch here, the AFCS stability augmentation roll. I like to have this off when I'm dogfighting. AFCS roll. So on the other side of that switch, on the left side of it, we have the pitch off and on, and the keybinds is AFCS pitch. On my throttle, I've got the roll set here. I've got my pitch on my paddle. So when I pull my paddle, it turns the switch off. When I let go of the paddle, it turns it back on. And the reason I like this is sometimes I like to take a really aggressive shot where I'm just going to pull the nose as hard as I can, and I'll pull the paddle, it turns off the pitch, and I can jerk the stick as hard as I want and then let it go and it re-engages. So it's kind of like a sneaky little thing to like instantly turn it off but then back on. Two of the gauges that I look at the most are probably my speed gauge right here and my altitude gauge. There's some miscellaneous keys that you can keybind, like you could do the hook, you could do your parking brake, your gear. Let me show you those on my throttle. So on my throttle I do have a switch for the launch bar, and then I've got a switch for the hook, and then I also have a switch for fold wings. The parking brake I have a little bit different. I like to pull it down to set the parking brake and up to turn it off. I guess it would be here, and then my gear would be here. One button I've almost forgot is my ejection button. I use this one for the ejection button. We've got our jettison button here as well. I almost forgot another switch. We've got fuel dump, and it's simply called fuel dump in the control panel. On my joystick, I like to use this switch on the side for my fuel dump. So I pull it back to dump fuel and then leave it in the middle to turn it off. Or if I press it forward, it's off. Also, while I'm here, we've got this button on my throttle. This is used as my master reset. Here's the master reset button. And basically what that's for is if you've messed with your wings. Let's say I press my wings forward. See how the wing sweep is showing the wings all the way forward? Basically what we could do is we could bring the wings back to match this little arrow here. Let's see if we can do that. And then we press the master reset switch. Whoops, hold on. Try to get them to match. Okay, now we press the master reset switch. And see, now they're back in auto. There's a couple ways you could do that too. I like to just use the lever to put the wings back together with this little arrow. But you could actually use the throttle to slow down or speed up. And one thing we could do is probably press the cover again to make sure we don't screw it up. Next we have the flaps, which are very important on the Tomcat. You can see they're right over here. If you don't want to jam the flaps, you need to be pretty much under 250. I would say 200 to be safe, but I think you're pretty safe under 250. This is going to be this switch here. It's going to be the hat switch here down for flaps down, and then up for flaps up. In the controls, it's simply flaps down and flaps up. The speed gauge can be a little bit hard to read. The inside number is going to be your knots, and normally your 200 is going to be over in this area. So a lot of times I don't like to drop the flaps until the needle is almost in this area where you can't really read the numbers. I believe the Mach number's on the outside, which I never look at. As we slow down, the auto wing should be coming forward. All right, we're going to drop the flaps at 250. Just wanted to show you the animation, and you'll see the flaps are coming down. Now let's dive and put the flaps up. So the flaps are up. And see, we didn't jam them as long as we didn't go over like 250. Now the wings will go back automatically. That's also very satisfying to be able to use the flaps in a dogfight and not jam them. If we go back to this hat switch, I like to press all the way up for F10. That'll bring up my map. And then Wing's also got an extra trigger over here. So if I pull the trigger, I can bring up F2, which will be exterior view. And if I pull it all the way back, it'll be F5. And then if I flick it forward, it goes back to F1, which is back in the cockpit. So this is kind of a handy, quick way if you need to go outside the cockpit. So that's about all I could think of for now. I hope that helps someone, give you an idea of where you might want to put it on your joystick. And remember, take my keybinds with a grain of salt.